In Glendale, the morning unfolded with tranquility. The sky boasted an unblemished blue, while the sidewalk in front of a bustling coffee shop teemed with patrons savoring their morning brews. Among them, Samuel Turner, a blind man, sat serenely at a table outside. Beside him stood Thor, his devoted German shepherd, alert and watchful. Thor was more than just a guide dog. He exuded an authoritative aura, a testament to his past as a seasoned canine unit now enjoying retirement. His life was devoted to safeguarding Samuel, providing not only direction but also a profound emotional bond that Samuel held dear. As Samuel enjoyed his coffee quietly, the sudden arrival of 3 motorcycles shattered the morning's calm as they parked near the cafe. Their engine's rumble captured everyone's attention. 3 men, wearing leather jackets with bold patches, climbed off their bikes. Their casual demeanor was overshadowed by a watchful scanning of the area, injecting a note of tension. Derek, who stood out as the leader, radiated authority with his boisterous, confident laughter. He made grand gestures while chatting with his companions, seemingly claiming control of their surroundings. Thor, ever vigilant, pricked up his ears, alert to the unusual disturbance. The trio meandered among the cafe's tables, eyeing the patrons. Derek's gaze landed on Thor and Samuel, and he paused to assess the German shepherd. "That's a big dog you've got there," he commented, his voice drawing a direct gaze from Thor. Derek let out a small laugh and leaned in a bit, gauging the dog's reaction. Thor remained still, his posture emitting a quiet but clear caution. Seeming to challenge the dog's composure, Derek waved his hands dramatically, jokingly questioning, "Is he really as smart as he looks?" His friends responded with strained chuckles. The air thickened with tension. Thor stayed motionless, yet his gaze never wavered from Derek. Samuel, oblivious to the scrutinizing eyes, voiced his concern. "Is everything okay?" His tone was steady, tinged with a subtle anxiety, perhaps picking up on Thor's altered demeanor. The quiet at their table stood in stark contrast to the surrounding murmurs. Thor, seasoned in navigating high-stress scenarios, maintained his composure, awaiting the opportune moment. Derek, noticing his attempts to unsettle had failed, retreated slightly, though his laughter rang out once more. Samuel, still unaware of the undercurrents, reached out to pat Thor, asking softly, "Are you okay, buddy?" In response, Thor edged closer to his owner but kept his eyes fixed on Derek, who now seemed to grasp the impact of his behavior. The mood shifted palpably in the cafe's outdoor space. As Samuel sipped the last of his coffee, Derek and his companion's laughter intensified, now carrying a challenging edge. Thor sat unflinchingly by Samuel, his body taut with readiness. His vigilant eyes tracked Derek's every action, prepared for any threat. He was more than a mere pet. He was a protector trained to defend at all costs. Derek, relishing the spotlight, sauntered over to Samuel's table, seemingly unaware of the onlookers' eyes on him. "You've got a nice-looking dog here, don't you?" he remarked playfully, though his tone carried a trace of condescension. Samuel offered a tentative smile, aiming to diffuse any tension. "Thanks, Thor is my best friend." Derek cocked his head, feigning interest. "Thor, huh? Named after the Norse god of thunder. Let's see if he's as mighty." Without waiting for Samuel to reply, Derek reached out swiftly to tap Thor's snout. To an outsider, the gesture might appear innocuous, but for Thor, finely attuned to detect threats, it was a provocation. The German shepherd didn't lash out but instead stepped back, issuing a low, warning growl. The atmosphere congealed further, casting a pall of uneasy silence around them. "Easy there, boy," Derek said, lifting his hands as though in jest, yet his eyes flickered with defiance. Samuel, confused by the unfolding events, gently placed his hand on Thor's neck to soothe him. "Sorry if he scared you," he offered earnestly. Derek chuckled, though his ego appeared slightly bruised by the dog's defensive reaction. He took a step back, but his friends began to rib him. "So, Derek, "You're going to let a dog put you in your place." Their words shifted the dynamic instantly. Derek, eager to salvage his pride, turned back to Thor with a challenging smile. The leader scanned the crowd, catching sight of several onlookers recording the scene on their phones. This might have made him hesitate momentarily, but backing down was not in his nature. "Relax, guys. It's just a dog," he remarked dismissively. However, Thor could discern between playful gestures and potential threats. Samuel, though unable to see, sensed the shift in the atmosphere. "Thor, what's wrong?" he murmured. The German shepherd's gaze remained locked on Derek, poised for any escalation. Derek stepped back, not in surrender but rather recalibrating. His friend's laughter and jeers seemed to stoke his wounded ego further. He paused, eyeing Thor challengingly, as if inviting the dog to react. The air crackled with tension. Samuel, oblivious to the hostile exchanges and the growing danger, attempted to defuse the situation. He doesn't like it when people come on too strong. Maybe that scared him. Yet Derek dismissed the attempt at pacification with a wave. He glanced around at his friends and the encircling crowd, seemingly seeking their endorsement for his next action. With a deliberate smirk, he advanced towards Thor, reaching out once more. Thor, firmly seated, issued another low growl, barely audible yet unmistakably menacing to those attuned to such warnings. The observers tensed, visibly uneasy. Derek, however, pressed on, driven to challenge the boundaries despite the clear signs of the dog's discomfort. "Let's see what you've got, big guy," Derek teased, chuckling nervously. "Do you really live up to your tough appearance?" As he spoke, he gently nudged Samuel's chair, an action that immediately got Thor, the German shepherd, on his feet. This subtle provocation was enough to set Thor off. While he didn't launch an attack, his entire demeanor shifted. He stood alert and rigid, his muscles taut as if he were a coiled spring. The surrounding crowd began to buzz with whispers, and several onlookers pulled out their phones to record the unfolding drama. Samuel noticed Thor's shift in behavior, and his brow creased in concern. He stroked the dog's neck, attempting to soothe him, but he sensed trouble brewing. "What's happening here?" Samuel voiced his concern, his face lined with worry. Derek responded with a laugh, though it was tinged with anxiety. Despite knowing the risks, he seemed reluctant to back down, especially with his friends and the gathering crowd watching. "It's nothing," he said, trying to wave off the situation and encouraging Samuel to ease up. "We're just having a bit of fun." Just then, a woman who had been observing from nearby stood up. "Stop it now," she demanded sharply. "Leave that dog be." Her command rang out across the sidewalk, causing Derek to falter for the first time. A flush of embarrassment washed over him as he caught the critical glances of the crowd. Thor remained stationary, his gaze fixed on Derek, poised for any threat. The air was thick with tension, as if a cord were stretched tight, ready to snap. Derek's gaze hardened as he faced the woman who had called him out, but he remained silent. The crowd's restlessness increased as they shifted their attention between him, Thor, and a visibly perplexed Samuel. Derek stepped back not as a gesture of surrender but to reassess his next move. "Just chill, it's all in good fun," he muttered, attempting to downplay the situation and restore some of his bruised ego. Despite his outward casualness, Derek was intent on reasserting himself. Thor, meanwhile, stayed motionless, his eyes locked on Derek with the precision of a seasoned observer, ready to anticipate the man's next action. Samuel tightened his grip on Thor's leash, whispering, "Easy, Thor. Stay calm, buddy. What's happening here?" He couldn't see Derek's aggressive posture, but the mounting tension was palpable. Thor was more than just a pet. He was a trained protector, and his heightened alertness was a clear signal to Samuel that danger was near. Trusting his dog implicitly, Samuel felt a surge of unease. The atmosphere among the spectators thickened with a tense silence, amplifying the unease. Suddenly, Derek feigned a retreat, but, driven by impulse, lashed out at a nearby chair with his foot, sending it clattering towards Thor. The metallic clang as it hit the pavement reverberated through the street, drawing gasps from the onlookers. Thor reacted with swift precision, sidestepping the chair as it skidded past him, his growl deepening, a sign of his readiness to defend if pushed further. His stance hardened, a clear indication that his patience was wearing thin. "Enough!" The woman's voice cut through the tension with increased force. Other bystanders began to voice their disapproval too, urging Derek to back down. Despite this, Derek remained defiant, his ego preventing him from seeing the escalating danger. "What's the big deal? It's just a bit of fun with the dog," Derek retorted, attempting to sound nonchalant. However, his balled fists betrayed his frustration and loss of composure. Thor maintained his vigilant posture, eyes fixed on Derek, prepared to respond to any further threats. Samuel, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, rose to his feet, his grip on Thor's leash firm and protective. The growing confrontation had finally caught his full attention, and he stood ready to intervene to protect his loyal companion. "Can anyone explain what's happening?" Samuel called out, visibly troubled by the unfolding events. However, before anyone could clarify, Derek advanced towards him, his posture threatening as he leaned in close to Samuel. The onlookers held their breath, sensing the intensity of the moment. Thor, perceiving the imminent risk to his owner, subtly lowered his stance, ready to shield Samuel if necessary. As Derek moved even closer, his looming figure felt overwhelmingly oppressive, particularly to someone unable to see the cues. "What's the matter, buddy? Are you hiding behind your dog?" Derek taunted, his laughter tinged with an edge of unease. Samuel maintained his composure, though his voice carried a hint of nervousness. "Thor doesn't hide me from anything," he responded firmly, his hand tight on the leash. "He's here for my protection, and it looks like he senses something I can't." Thor remained motionless, his deep growl resonating more intensely as the seconds ticked by, echoing his readiness to defend. The murmurs of the crowd, initially subdued, grew louder, reflecting their growing unease with Derek's actions. An elderly man at a nearby table finally rose to his feet and intervened. "Enough's enough. You need to leave now, before things turn ugly." However, Derek, egged on by his friends and his own arrogance, dismissed the warning. He regarded the man merely as another hurdle, though his increasingly troubled expression betrayed his inner turmoil. Then, breaking the tense silence, Thor let out a loud, deep bark, a resolute sound that made Derek instinctively recoil. It was a bark that demanded attention, signaling the dog's readiness to defend. The crowd's reaction was immediate, marked by gasps and a flurry of activity. Some reached for their phones to record, while others retreated. The atmosphere had palpably changed. Samuel, alerted by Thor's bark, sensed that a serious confrontation was imminent. "Thor, I'm okay," he reassured, attempting to soothe the agitated German shepherd. Yet Thor maintained his intense stare at Derek, clearly unconvinced by the words. In a desperate bid to salvage his pride, Derek made a sudden move forward, trying to shove Samuel by the shoulder. It was a swift gesture, but not swift enough to escape Thor's notice. The dog instantly positioned himself protectively between Derek and Samuel, his actions quick and decisive. Thor didn't lash out, but he stood resolutely, his teeth slightly exposed in a stark warning that it was time to stop. Silence enveloped the street. Derek halted, caught off guard, while Thor's intense gaze seemed to hold him in place. Recognizing the gravity of the moment, Samuel looked up and stated firmly, "It's best if you leave now." The surrounding crowd began to whisper amongst themselves, this time disapproving of Derek. He glanced around, aware that he had lost not just the confrontation but also his composure. Without another word, he retreated, masking his embarrassment as best as he could. His friends followed in quiet compliance, and soon they all disappeared around the corner. The morning had begun with the gentle predictability of routine, but it had since shifted into an atmosphere dense with murmurs and tension. Samuel sensed the change around him, a palpable shift in the air even though he couldn't see it. The distant rumble of motorcycles had dwindled, overtaken by the subdued chatter of onlookers discussing the scene they had just witnessed. Thor remained by his side, his posture still rigid, a slight tremor visible in his front paws. Sensing his dog's continued alertness, Samuel knelt down and stroked the fur of the German Shepherd. "It's okay now, buddy," he whispered, trying to ease Thor's tension. Yet Thor hesitated, his eyes locked on the spot where Derek had vanished, as if sensing that the man posed a recurring threat, not merely a momentary danger. Gently caressing Thor's snout, Samuel whispered, "You sense something I don't, right?" His words, simple yet profound, echoed the deep trust he placed in his vigilant companion. The crowd around them thinned gradually, yet some lingered nearby, their curiosity unabated. A woman who had earlier confronted Derek approached Samuel, her expression etched with concern. "Are you okay?" she inquired, her voice quivering slightly from the adrenaline. Samuel nodded, though his furrowed brows betrayed his internal unease. "I'm fine. But Thor, he's never reacted this way before. He senses when things aren't right, and that concerns me." The woman bent down to examine Thor more closely. "This dog, he's something special, isn't he?" Samuel let out a sigh, his face a blend of pride and wistfulness. "No, he's not just any dog. He was trained as a K9, to protect, to serve, and if needed, to sacrifice it all. That was years ago, though. I thought he had moved past that life. Now, he's my guide, my family." The woman peered into Thor's eyes, as if searching for an unseen truth. "Maybe he never forgot who he is," she murmured softly. The elderly man who had earlier stepped in moved closer, his voice deep and resonant with wisdom. "Listen, son," he started. "Dogs like him, their instincts surpass our understanding. His reaction wasn't random. Trust him and stay vigilant. That man, Derek, doesn't seem like the type to let things go easily." Samuel absorbed the stranger's advice, tightening his grip on Thor's leash slightly. The German Shepherd gazed back at him, his eyes conveying depths that words could never capture. The quiet was shattered by a distant noise, the thrum of engines. They hadn't grown any nearer, yet they lingered in the air. Samuel inhaled sharply, his hand soothingly patting Thor's head. "Perhaps it's all in my head," he mused silently, yet the quivering of Thor's frame suggested otherwise. Unbeknownst to him, this minor event was merely the precursor to a greater saga, one that would challenge Thor's fidelity as well as Samuel's courage in facing the unforeseen. The air of tension seemed to dissipate, but not for Thor. While he now rested beside Samuel, his breath came quicker than usual, his gaze vigilant to every stir in their vicinity. Feeling his dog's unease, Samuel knew it was time to depart the cafe. He picked up the leash and rose gradually, his smile strained as he nodded to the scattering of patrons still present. "We appreciate you all hanging around. Thor and I could use some air," he announced before they began their stroll along the sidewalk. Their routine walk home carried a new weight that morning. Every stride seemed filled with significance. Silence enveloped them, broken only by the tap of Thor's paws against the concrete and the gentle clinking of his leash. Though Samuel was blind to it, Thor's heightened alertness and tense stance conveyed more than any visual cue ever could, a constant, subtle alarm that all was still not well. Upon reaching Samuel's modest flat, he unhooked Thor's leash, letting the dog explore the apartment freely. "You seem off today, buddy," Samuel observed, groping for Thor's water bowl on the kitchen counter. The German Shepherd paced the apartment slowly, nosing into every corner as though on a meticulous search. He eventually paused by the door, sitting with his ears perked up, attuned to any external noises. Samuel's expression grew concerned. "What's up, Thor? This isn't like you." Settling onto the sofa, Samuel's thoughts drifted to the tales he'd heard about Thor before adopting him. He was aware of the dog's past as a K9 unit, but had never delved into the full story. Thor had been integral in critical situations, his keen sense of danger often proving life-saving, and now it appeared those instincts were resurfacing. "Are you sensing something, boy?" Samuel inquired, stroking the dog's fur. Thor gave a soft tail wag, yet his gaze remained fixed on the door. Then, a faint motorcycle rumble sounded again outside, barely noticeable. Thor's head shot up, his body stiffening anew. Though Samuel didn't catch the sound, he sensed Thor's alertness. He rested his hand on Thor's shoulder, offering the reassurance he always did. "Whatever it is, we're in this together," he whispered. Unbeknownst to Samuel, that vow would soon be put to the test in ways he couldn't have predicted. As dusk settled, a serene hush enveloped the small neighborhood, draping it in tranquility. Samuel sat at his humble dining table, methodically cutting an apple while Thor lay beside him. The earlier unease still permeated the room, an unvoiced heaviness that both Samuel and Thor felt palpably. As he sliced, Samuel's hand brushed against Thor's fur, and he half whispered to himself, "Maybe I'm just reading too much into things, huh, buddy?" Thor's ears flicked, his intense gaze locked on the front door, as if expecting something invisible to Samuel. Suddenly, the silence outside was broken by a distant drone of engines. Initially soft, the noise soon intensified, becoming clearer. Thor shot up, his posture taut as he fixed his eyes on the door. Samuel stopped moving, alert to Thor's reaction. "What is it, Thor?" he queried, his tone calm yet tinged with anxiety. The engine's sudden halt was followed by a dense silence that seemed to press against the apartment's thin walls. Samuel reached for his phone, his fingers trembling slightly. "Stay calm," he murmured to himself, even as his heart raced. Soon after, a knock resounded through the apartment, sharp and intentional. Thor issued a low growl, positioning himself protectively between Samuel and the door. With a moment's hesitation, Samuel stood, his grip tightening on Thor's leash. "Who is it?" he called, his voice steady yet cautious. There was no reply at first, just the whisper of indistinct voices outside. Samuel's heart rate accelerated. He could sense Thor's tension vibrating through the leash, the dog poised for defense. "I'm not opening the door until you tell me who you are," Samuel stated firmly. A deep, somewhat recognizable voice answered, "Relax, man. It's just me, Derek." The name sent a chill through Samuel. Thor responded with a sharp bark, his growl growing more pronounced. Samuel's hold on the leash tightened as he took a step back, widening the gap between him and the door. "What do you want?" he demanded, a hint of suspicion coloring his tone. Derek's voice attempted a nonchalant tone, but a trace of underlying threat was unmistakable. "Just wanted to chat, man. No hard feelings about earlier, right?" Samuel didn't respond immediately, his mind racing through his options. Thor, attuned to the tension, stood alert and ready. The silence lingered, heavy with the presence of Derek just outside the door. "You need to leave," Samuel declared, his voice firm and determined. The murmuring outside intensified briefly before the sound of footsteps signaled a retreat. However, neither Thor nor Samuel relaxed. The air remained charged, as if a storm was brewing just out of sight. The quiet that followed Derek's departure was fleeting. Samuel paced the living room, his hand absently brushing the familiar shapes of the furniture, trying to settle his nerves. Thor, meanwhile, was visibly uneasy. He moved to the window, his body rigid as he sniffed the air and peered into the darkness. "What is it, Thor?" Samuel murmured, more to himself than to his companion. A deep sense of foreboding settled in his chest, a conviction that Derek's departure wasn't the end of whatever he had started. Minutes later, the stillness was disrupted by the sound of footsteps, soft yet intentional, circling the apartment building. Thor issued a sharp bark, his muscles tensed, ready to spring into action. Samuel stood rooted to the spot, his heart pounding furiously. He reached for the phone on the counter, his hands shaking as he fumbled to dial 911. "Stay calm," he muttered to himself, even as his nerves threatened to overwhelm him. Thor positioned himself by the door, emitting a low, continuous growl, a warning that echoed throughout the compact space. Once connected, Samuel's voice trembled as he spoke to the emergency dispatcher. "There's someone outside my apartment," he reported, his grip on Thor's leash tightening in response to the dog's intensifying growls. "I think they're here to cause harm." The dispatcher responded reassuringly, confirming that police officers were en route, but the waiting time stretched interminably. Outside, the footsteps came closer, each step more purposeful than the last. Then, a new sound, something scraping against the window pane. It was a faint, sinister noise that escalated the tension, sending a wave of fear through Samuel. The scratching halted suddenly, followed by a stifled swear from beyond the door. Thor growled louder, his frame pressed firmly against the barrier as if challenging the prowler to advance. Samuel, holding tightly to Thor's leash, retreated to the corner, his thoughts spinning. Feeling vulnerable, he depended on Thor's sharp senses and the faint hope that assistance would arrive soon. "They're on their way, Thor," he whispered, maintaining a calm tone despite the fear washing over him. "Hang in there." At last, the distant sound of police sirens broke through the heavy silence. The footsteps outside stopped, swiftly replaced by the sound of retreating steps. Thor stayed alert, his growl easing but still present. Samuel let out a shaky breath, clutching his phone as he quietly said, "They've arrived. Thank you." A brief sense of relief overcame him, mixed with the awareness that the ordeal wasn't fully resolved. Derek had gone too far, and Samuel realized he had to be ready for whatever might follow. The flickering police lights cast a surreal glow over the street as two officers neared Samuel's residence. Thor, still tense, remained by the door, his ears upright and his stance stiff. Samuel cautiously opened the door, the cool night breeze touching his face. "Officers, I appreciate your swift response," he greeted them, his voice firm, though fear still echoed in his tone. Thor stayed on guard, his gaze flicking to the dark corners outside, sensing that the danger might still be near. The officers prompted Samuel to detail the events, jotting down his account of the earlier altercation with Derek and the unsettling noises that had surrounded his apartment. "He didn't actually touch me," Samuel confessed, his hand tightening on Thor's leash. "But his behavior is erratic, and I'm certain he'll return." One officer stooped to stroke Thor, but the dog stayed tense, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "Your dog has good instincts," the officer remarked. "With him this on edge, it's smart to stay vigilant." While canvassing the vicinity, they spotted fresh footprints near Samuel's window. They traced the path but found no trace of Derek or his accomplices. "He's probably long gone," one officer commented, though the reassurance in their voice was lacking. They advised Samuel to remain indoors, keep his phone handy, and call them if anything further occurred. "We'll step up patrols around here," the other officer promised, "but if you feel at risk, consider leaving for the night." Samuel nodded, though he had no plans to flee. This was his home, and he wouldn't allow Derek to drive him away. Once the officers had departed, a profound silence settled over the apartment. Samuel sat at the edge of his bed with Thor lying vigilant at his feet. He reached out to pat the dog's back, finding comfort in the familiar gesture. "I'm not sure what's ahead, Thor," he whispered, "but I trust you'll be ready." Thor's ears perked up at Samuel's voice, and for the first time that night his tail twitched with a weak wag, a slight but comforting sign amidst the ongoing tension. Samuel eventually fell into a shallow, uneasy sleep. Thor, ever alert, stayed positioned by the door, his presence a steadfast shield between Samuel and the external threats. Their connection had deepened immensely, strengthened by a mutual experience of fear and reliance. Regardless of Derek's intentions, Samuel was clear on one fact. He was not alone in this. Thor was more than just a service dog or an ex-police canine. He was a defender, a comrade, and a symbol of the resilience found in unity.